want us to get into the letter from the president's desk from yesterday, titled "The Just Energy Transition is Gathering Pace and Creating Opportunity." I always encourage people to go check the letter out themselves and read it for themselves and sit with the letter, really ask themselves questions about the letter and interact and engage with the letter. You can do so by just going to the official pages of the Presidency of South Africa. They do share the links every Mondays. This one, again, is titled "The Just Energy Transition is Gathering Pace and Creating Opportunity." Dear fellow South African, on the Mpumalanga Highveld between the towns of Bethel, Daville and Morgazine are powerful symbols of South Africa's energy future. Wind turbines rise above a landscape that was once dominated by the cooling towers of coal-fired power stations. The wind turbines form part of the first phase of Umbila Emoyeni wind farm that entered into commercial operation last week. The facility has been built by the Seriti Green, a sub of Seriti Resources, a proudly South African company. This is a demonstration that South Africa's clean energy investments are not only being driven from abroad, but also by domestic firms which, with the foresight to invest in their country's future. The 155 MW milliwatts of clean energy generated by the 25 wind turbines will be wheeled through Eskom's transmission network to supply Seriti's coal mining operation. And once completed, the 900 milliwatts hybrid energy cluster will comprise wind, solar, and battery storage. Once fully operational, it will be the largest hybrid energy facility in the country. The Umbila Emoyeni project is an important contribution to South Africa's evolving energy mix. The 2025 Integrated Resource Plan aims to achieve a diversified portfolio of energy sources that relies more on wind and solar and a reduced share of coal, supported by gas, battery storage, and nuclear power. Since the late 1800s, the coal fields of Mpumalanga have helped industrialize our country. Coal miners, artisans, and power stations, station workers in Mpumalanga have produced the electricity to power our mines, factories, businesses, hospitals, schools, and even homes. It is therefore significant that on the Mpumalanga Highveld, where some of the energy systems of tomorrow are being built, while drawing on the strengths and resources we already possess, including coal-fired power. Even though coal continues to dominate South Africa's energy mix, the growth of renewable energy is accelerating. He goes on to say, according to Stats SA, in 2016, renewable energy supplied just 2% of locally generated electricity. By 2021, that number had risen to 6%, and by 2024, renewables accounted for 9% of local electricity generation. The country now has close to 16 GW. Help out. GW, that's your gigawatts, yes, gigawatts of installed renewable capacity, with 32 gigawatts of projects now in the grid connection process and expected to connect by 2030. The installation of rooftop solar by households and businesses have exceeded expectations. According to Stats SA, there has been an 86% increase in households with solar panels over just a 3-year period, totaling 675,000 households in 2025. I don't know if that's like a conscious decision for people to actually, move towards solar systems, or more than just them anticipating or fearing the possibility of actually getting load shedding. Because I know a lot of families that have now moved or migrated from using electricity to solar panels because at least they can rely on the sun. On electricity, not so much.
Yeah, we cannot really rely on electricity. However, with the president's letter today, it's quite a convincing one. I have to say, there has been improvement from 2021 when we talk about the 2%, and now 2024 we have 9%. In terms of people now using solar.
Yeah.
And even the number of households, the
675,000. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
Of rooftops that have solar today. So there is improvement. over 80% over the past 3 years. We're up over 80% in the past 3 years. So I think that the president is trying. I think there is improvement. But I think we should focus a bit more kancane nje, on the good things of the letter. However, there are bad things.
The alarming, as always. Let me continue reading the letter. The investment in clean energy technologies, which was accelerated by load shedding in recent years, was enabled by far-reaching legislative and regulatory reforms, the removal of self-generation licensing threshold, and the revival of the renewable energy independent power producer procurement program unlocked large-scale private investment in electricity generation. Attracting clean energy investment supports our climate commitments while promoting inclusive growth and job creation. At this year's South Africa Investment Conference, more than 50 billion rands in green energy investment commitments were announced. We also released South Africa's first energy infrastructure investment prospectus, a coordinated pipeline of investment-ready projects across the electricity value chain. Secure, reliable, and affordable energy is critical to growing industry, developing our economy, and improving the lives of citizens. The president also says the just energy transition is not only about protecting affected communities, workers, and businesses from the impact of the shift towards renewable energy. Going green must also make electricity cheaper for consumers. This is why we are working to establish a competitive electricity market in which several operators will compete to provide electricity most efficiently and at the lowest cost. Oh my goodness, I don't know how I feel about that, but you are here for that exact reason. Last week, Cabinet approved the publication of the revised electricity pricing policy and the draft electricity sector market transformation position paper for public comment. Also, in the past week, I received a progress report from the task team working towards the establishment of a fully independent, state-owned entity responsible for transmission and the operation of the electricity market. Oh my goodness, these task teams. The opening of Umbila Emoyeni facility in Mpumalanga and the clean energy revolution underway bears witness to a country that, even when confronted with an energy crisis, adapted, reformed, and laid the groundwork for a new future. That is so poetic. It is now incumbent on government, working with business, labor, and civil society to ensure that South Africa's transition delivers for all. It must be a transition that is inclusive, that expands opportunity, and that leaves communities stronger than before. And most importantly, it must deliver affordable electricity for all now and into the future. With best regards, Umongameli Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's actually give it to him, because that for me was a very interesting, letter. One, he spoke about, how coal was very integral in the building of South Africa. It powered our mines, it powered our factories, it powered our hospitals, it powered our schools, and to some extent, even our homes. And I think for me, the one question I'm sitting with is, what do we owe the coal workers and coal towns as the country when we try and move towards solar and wind? I think for the longest time, coal workers, miners have been complaining about job security, but not just job security. They've also been complaining about, the pay, the wages, the income, that it's tough. I mean, Marikana is evident to that, in case you didn't want to believe it. But if you remember, in 2012, we had a massacre, Marikana, where mine workers died because of demanding really fair pay. And so I don't know what this means for the population that is already struggling with unemployment right now. And even those who are employed are not, working in the most perfect conditions, or they don't get the value for money for the work that they do. And I mean, he also says renewable energy has grown from 2% in 2016 to 9% of generation in 2024. So that's about a good 8 years, 2016, 2024. That's about a good 8 years, and it grew by 7%. And I'm wondering whether or not that pace feels fast or slow sitting with you today, or do you think it's unnecessary also? I don't know. We'd like to hear your thoughts. And this is where Ucwenga comes in to help us understand what this letter from the president means today, with all of the questions we might have and with all of, the thoughts that are sparked by this letter. Ucwenga will help us understand this letter. Once again, thank you for joining us. How are you since the last time we spoke? And the last time we spoke, we were in a different building.
Yeah, different location entirely. I'm good. I hope you guys are doing good too. I'm happy to be here. It's a lively new location.
Yeah.
It feels like home. It feels good to be here. So it's gonna be nice unpacking the president's letter, especially such a letter in this new environment. Yeah.
And I think before we get into the letter itself, I want to know your first impression, the general overview of the letter, and what it sparked in you.
For the first time in quite some time, the president is a bit real. The figures he gave us was not lying. The numbers are real. Everything that happens in terms of renewables, it is real. The numbers, the figures, the timelines, and even the investment itself that he's proposing, it's all real. So when I first saw the letter, I saw improvement. I saw that finally we can see where we were as a country and where we are today, and that there is, yes, still room for improvement. However, we have to take the small wins we have and celebrate them. So I loved the way the president drafted his letter. I was in love with the information itself. It was quite an interesting letter to go through. So for me, it wasn't a good one to read. It was a good read for me.
Really? For me, what is coming out of this letter is the framing of the story or of this letter as that of adaptation. He speaks about a country that had an energy crisis and now used it to reform and used it to innovate onto the green economy. Do you think that is a fair framing from your point of view?
Takes time. I think that's where the president again lacks. It's not that everything he has told us in this letter it is lies. However, there are a lot of things that he's not considering. Where we are as a country, the current affairs that we have in the country, the issues we're facing as a country. So some things sometimes may seem again like ambition, even though the intention, and the historical purpose are behind the letter itself, it may be significant. So that's the issue with the president's letter. It is not that it's wrong, but simply the fact that it is misaligned to the reality we live in today. That's where the issue is.
That is very interesting for me, because he spoke about how we went from an increase to like 86%, and 86% is a huge number, but I also feel like it is not inclusive of the country, right? It is a huge number based on the targets they probably had set for themselves. And I wonder which communities is he speaking about, because as a person who lives in Tanzania, for example, I barely see houses with solar panels, but when I'm here in Vincent, I see a lot of them. So is this 86% of the middle class, those who can afford solar, because it's quite expensive? Or is it 86% of what?
I think it's 86% of people who can afford solar. But I think there are some RDP houses that were built not so long ago that do actually that have solar systems with them. So we cannot be really sure whether when he talks about this 86%, whether in terms of what threshold of households he's talking about specifically. However, I would stand with you and say, Bana, when you go to Mdantsane, we go to Weekend Village, we go to Southern Wood, we rarely even see even one house, just one with the solar panel. So they may then be reason to believe that it may not be something that is happening where we are, Tina, or it can be something that might be happening in terms of maybe in your Gauteng, your Sandton, your Midrand, your Beacon Bay, your Nahoon. People who can afford the solar panels, these things, they require a lot of capital to build, And hence, one thing that stood out for me when he talked about this company in South Africa, the Seriti Green, he said it's proudly South African. However, I think there's a deeper question to that. People think, the president is trying to frame that because there is domestic ownership, right? And it's a kind of company that is from South Africa that's doing this. It basically now means
South
that
Africans are benefiting.
exactly. Whereas that is not true, because if to look into a deeper lens, which the lens, the letter is not answering at all, which has to begin whether what does it mean, mana, because of domestic ownership of the specific company? Does it mean now that the control of the company is the control of capital in this company funded by Western, or funded by foreign nationals, or by this country
It's
itself?
91% black owned. So it says. But also what I've learned about companies, whether South African or international, is that for me, whether or not the company is South African doesn't matter. I mean, Kat Matlala was, a CEO of a company that was black owned, a Medicare that got almost every government tender of the day, but it was black owned. Who did it benefit? Those Gucci's and those different outfits he was, he's constantly wearing. Who did that benefit? So I'm not too sure why that was being mentioned, but I'm interested in something that the president also mentioned, that coal has powered South Africans since the 1800s. And I'm interested in a systems term. How difficult is it to shift from a system that is old, a system that is deeply entrenched, to now this new system, this new green economy, and this green just energy transition? How difficult will it be to shift from what we already know to something new?
The shift may be something that should be a one of the biggest concerns. We should think of the economy as a whole. Now, let's talk about employment. Already we know the people who work in these coal mines, they are the ones who are employed currently. So if we switch the system and moved to this specific system, what is currently happening now? With the president letter, he spends a lot of words talking about gigawatts, spends a lot of words talking about percentages and billions of rands, but he does not talk about the people, right? And now this is where the problem is. It's because a just energy transition is not enough. We need a transition, because with the transition of just energy, yes, there will be reskilling. Yes, there will be more jobs that will be brought forward. There will be reskilling programs. There will be your social protection and your real investment in your communities, right? However, it does not necessarily mean in the immediate term that the people who are employed in those coal mines will then also be taken and trained for the new economic sector we're going into. And that's where there is a misalignment there, and a huge gap. And structurally, that may lead to a widened unemployment to what we already have. Now, moving from where we are, which is the coal system, to a system where we talk about green, it has to be a soft transition. We have to look into capital. It requires a lot of capital. It requires time. It requires precision. And making fast moves sometimes may be the most dangerous move we can make. So I think when it comes to this specific thing, it comes back to the people, because yes, the idea may be good. Yes, the transition plan may be sound. However, just a small mistake in the transition plan can end up affecting the whole system itself, and the people who want to carry the cost are the South African citizens, who in this case don't even have those solar panels on top of their own roofs. So that's where the issue is with the president's letter here, that yes, there are numbers, we see the gigawatts, we see the percentages and the increases. However, the cost will be incurred by the people themselves, people who do not even afford the solar panels, people who find it hard to buy bread, buy fuel today. They will be the ones incurring the cost. So
workers who
that's
have
the
been
danger.
working in mines
Exactly.
for so long, and now will need a skills transfer, because what you used to do is a bit different from this new transition. I'm also interested in something that the president mentioned. He mentioned a newly independent state-owned entity for transmission, which is separate from generation. From a systems view, why does unbundling the functions of Eskom really matter? Why is it important that we have the state-owned entity? Is it a good move for us, or we just have to wait and see?
I think the president might have made a mistake. For me, how I see things, I think what he could have done was to shift how Eskom operates. Now, what do I mean? Eskom could have easily been a company, a state-owned enterprise that was going to be given the responsibility to ensure that they will have oversight over the private procurement companies that will be providing these specific services instead of the government opening a new SOE. Now, that's where the issue is, because opening a new SOE, that means, yeah, sure, there'll be more people employed. However, that is more capital deployed, whereas we could have just made a few tweaks in the system of Eskom and made it an overview body over than them being the main contributor to the economy of electricity. And then we have some sort of a system where we have public-private partnerships. I think that could have been a safer bet for the state, could have been a better move for the state than starting another state-owned enterprise. We have many of them that have failed by far, your Transnet, your Eskom.
Yeah.
So bringing another one in, it is something that's going to make people fear, but is this another failure? Could this lead to another distraction
But
also?
to that point of private partnerships, the president also mentioned establishing a unit that would see different companies now being in the front lines of also transmission, and therefore they would all compete as to which one is more affordable, which one is more reliable, and they would all do the bidding to now be in the front lines of delivering electricity to communities. So isn't that good to say we will have alternatives in the form of private sector companies that are willing to come into the space and say we are also willing to be service providers for electricity?
Now, the biggest danger with that, and I think that the government is not paying much attention to, is because what their main focus is on, it is the domestic ownership. Whereas domestic ownership is not really the main issue. The main issue we need to look into is the control of capital. The main issue we need to look into, it is specifically the technological resources. The main issue we need to look into is the long-term value. Now, that is what the government is missing here. Yes, as much as we need domestic ownership, BE, for an example, there are ways through a system, the legal system we have, for one, a foreign national who wants to, let's say, contribute to this economy, to use the domestic ownership as a vehicle to funnel capital in the country. However, as much as there is domestic ownership doesn't mean you have control. So you may have an ownership as a black person in South Africa. You can own the company, but you don't control capital. So if you don't control capital, you don't control the long-term value of the business itself, and you don't control the technical resources that will be implemented. That's where the danger is.
But I will sell back to capital.
You cannot
and
easily
then I
sell.
could be a face, or maybe I could be the face of the company and let capital do the controlling from behind. No,
that is what I'm fearing with Seriti also. That is what the president is not talking about. Yes, he's talking about the domestic ownership, but it's not giving us the entire structure of the company itself to show us, Bana, where is the control of capital? Yes, for example,
owned.
It can
Where's
be
that 9%?
Exactly. You and me, we can own a company together now, right? We own the majority shares of the company. Then let's say we have a few members in the company. However, you have a white funder and I have a white funder. But no one has to know that. What matters is that you and I are the main business owners in the company. So when it comes to the ownership of the company, that's who we're going to be seeing. So when they talk about the 91%, that is what it shows. However, it doesn't show who really has control of
Who's
capital.
the 9%?
Exactly. Who has control of the capital? Who has control of the technological resources? Who has control of the long-term value of the business itself? And that's where the danger is.
There's a policy reference in this letter that speaks to the removal of self-generation licensing threshold and the revival of the renewable energy IPP program. How much of this transition is really about technology versus about rules changing? And I also didn't understand that as I was reading the letter, why we even had such a law in place to begin with.
We don't necessarily have a policy issue. We don't really have to change policies. What we need to do is redirect and redesign the direction of the policies where they're facing. That's where the issue is.
Yeah.
Now, implementing new policies and trying to bring new strategies will not take us anywhere. Because you can have policies, like I said last time. You can have policies. However, if ever the system that is going to adopt the system itself, it is fragile, then there's nothing good. There's no good that's going to come from that. We have to look into the government failures that we have, right? We have to look into the corruption issue that we have. We have to look into the issue that there are black businesses in South Africa that get capital funneled by foreign nationals. And then they may have, yes, large amounts of ownership of the company. However, they don't have control of the company. And these things are done through NDAs. They're done through agreements that happen between the two parties involved in the specific contract. Now, that's where the issue is. So, yes, policy may be good. Yes, we can design one of the greatest bills to show where we're going in the next 10 years. However, if ever on the ground, the system is fragile, failure is to come. It is something that we should expect. And I think that is what the government is not really putting much lens into. Because the greatest issue here has to be one simple thing, that when it comes to the people who are working in those coal mines, when you're going to change the system from a coal system and you're moving to this system, and in your transition plan, it looks like you're trying to abandon the old system and you're choosing this new system. That basically means that there will be a huge gap of unemployed individuals that were previously employed, and that will lead to now the country running into a deficit because we're going to be making less money compared to before. And that's where the real issue is here, because the government is not looking for a soft transition from where we are to where we're going, but they're looking for a fast solution by funneling 50 billion rand, for an example. As much as capital is important to move forward, the current system itself, the way it is on the ground, it matters more than anything. It matters more than capital. If ever the infrastructure is fragile, nothing good will come from that capital. Instead, we'll just bring more capital to fix the same issues that don't really even require capital, but they require us to fix the current inefficiencies on the ground.
You know, what I'm getting from you is that systems often have unintended consequences, unintended implications. And what's a risk or blind spot that is in this transition, but you don't think is getting enough attention, and something that people should be paying attention to, because it might be an unintended implication if it is not properly checked?
Has to be the government talking about that they are going to be transitioning to this new system, and they're going to be redirecting people also to the system. They clearly say in the letter that there will be reskilling programs involved. However, the government, as much as the president talks about that, he's not giving us a real mechanism on how he's going to do that on the ground. So this is like it's a plan he has on his head, but there is no bill. And most policies that have to do with the transition of these the renewables themselves, most of them, they are still bills that are still out for the public to review. So they're not yet, Lendo, out as amendments already. They're still out for review, for public comment. So because of that alone, that has to then therefore prove to us that the government does not really yet have the resources required, does not yet have the infrastructure required for them to transition from where we are to where we are going. And this is just merely a letter to say, Bana, no, this is what we wish for the country. This is the direction we want to go, and not really where we might be going. Because on the ground, when you look into the policies required for us to transition, we look into to everything required for us to transition, it's all not there. All is there is just the words of the president. Yes, the stats is there. We have the increases, but however, from the 2, if it's not 2 or 3% to the 9%, it is slow growth. That is 2016 to 2024. So we cannot be proud of slow growth. Yes, we can celebrate the win. However, it is too slow. South Africa right now, it is number 1 in terms of GDP in Africa. We have a lot of capital, but we're using it and misusing it we're using it in the wrong way. So we need to find means and ways to utilize our capital the right way for us to be able to move forward. That's where the greatest danger of this country is.
You know, the cabinet just approved the draft electricity sector market transformation position paper for public comment. What should ordinary citizens and young people in particular, I mention young people because I think it's important for young people to contribute to policy. So what should ordinary citizens be looking out for when a policy like this opens for public comment?
Look for loopholes. I would say for young people, when you receive these these amendments and white papers, it is very important for us to do research and not neglect them. There are a lot of, I'll give you an example. You see, from February 28th, when I think the war started then, until May, there were over 5 financial laws that were amended that people didn't even know about because they were too distracted about the war. Now, the greatest danger to us, and that we don't understand as young people yet, it is that whether we like it or not, law and politics are interrelated. They are one thing. And if you are disconnected as a young person from these two systems, you are going to be moving in the dark. So it is very important to
No pun
educate
intended.
yourself. You have to educate yourself. I'm not saying choose a party, vote EFF, vote EA. No. You don't have to choose a party, but understand. Chase consensus and understanding of the system. Understand how the system works. With the white paper that is released on this specific the renewables themselves, I would urge people to start doing their research. Understand by now,
Yes.
when they're speaking about specific matrix, what do those matrix mean? Microeconomically, where is this policy taking us? Macroeconomically, where is this policy taking us? How will this specific policy change how individuals in the economy make their decisions, how individual companies and individual segments of the government make decisions? But also not merely just look into that alone, but look into the broader perspective, which is the macroeconomic factors of this economy, where in GDP-wise, with this implemented the right way, where can it take us as an economy? I think as young people, it's very important that we use and utilize the education we have, because it's not that we are not educated. We are educated, but we just choose not to utilize that education. We have resources. We have your AI systems. We have your Google. We have data. We have YouTube. It is easy for us to learn the things necessary to understand this document. So it's very important for us to use those resources to learn and understand, so that we can be able to comment and say, no, man, you say this specific thing under a specific clause, but I think this is a specific loophole and I think you can fix it this and this and this way. Maybe that can one day help the government before they make it an amended bill.
The letter also insisted on the transition that's about to happen being inclusive and must leave communities stronger than ever. In systems thinking, how do you actually design for inclusion rather than just hoping that it will include people? What would be a practical systems framework that would help the government truly include communities that are poverty stricken, to truly include communities like Mdantsane, communities like Duncan Village, and other communities in rural areas to be a part of this transition? RDP House?
The government has to first funnel capital, whether we like it or not. Capital is very crucial. There's nothing you can do without capital. Secondly, if ever we're really transitioning to this,
what does funneling capital look like?
It is making deals, right, that will be in the benefication of the majority of the economy.
Sure.
Yes, I'll give you an example of a deal that people didn't want it. Everyone was fighting it. The Elon Musk, the Starlink coming into South Africa, because they didn't want to sell their shares, and because of the BEE laws, they have to lose about approximately 30% of their shares to someone who's black. But they didn't allow that, and there's a continuous dispute. However, if we can think about someone like Elon Musk bringing Starlink in this country, he will not only bring Starlink, he's going to bring Starlink, he's going to bring Ustar Shield, also, as I say, together with your Tesla and your SpaceX. So that is going to create employment. However, you cannot do as without funneling capital. So capital is not necessarily has to be just money, liquid money. It can be specific companies that can be brought into the country and accommodated for further employment to be able to then therefore build into the economy. But it's about making risks. Countries like China have made such risks by making such agreements with certain private companies to ensure that they can maximize employment. So I think it's about time that South Africa also stops playing much in a defensive mode and go a bit more attacking. The government has to find these businesses that are willing to invest in our country. There are people who want to invest in the country. Let them come in, try and accommodate them. Don't bend policies and laws for them. However, find ways and means that are already there in the laws that we have to accommodate them, to ensure that we can maximize employment and to accommodate the people, Koma Mdantsane, Koma Duncan Village, and so on. We need to build the plants ourselves here. That's what we need. We need to build the plants here. We need to not try and push everyone. Because if you look into mini plants that actually create much electricity, that there is very few or close to none in Eastern Cape. Most of them are in your Gauteng, in your Northwest, and in other provinces. So for us to be inclusive, the government has to allocate capital that is beyond the capital that is there for the infrastructure itself. They must find means and ways to get more capital available, be able to build build systems and an architectural system to ensure that the system is decentralized. They are growing all provinces, all towns at a rate that is close to being equivalent or equal. Yes, sure, it can never be equivalent or equal, but trying to achieve that.
And who does the monitoring of the creation or the building of such infrastructure projects, right? Of these factories here, of infrastructure here. Who monitors that? Because quite frankly, I'm not sure if I trust the monitoring and oversight side of things. It's all good. It's all well and good that the Eastern Cape could be included and should be included, as you say, but who is then tasked with the responsibility to monitor and evaluate?
There is no one currently in the government that has the ability to monitor. We have to consider something that many people will disagree with. We need to find someone who is not politicized, someone who is not stuck to a specific political party, but someone knowledgeable who understands the system.
And so do we get systems thinkers all in one,
exactly,
or bodies that regulate systems thinkers? So, for example, if you're an accountant, you have is it SAIC or something? But you've got a regulatory bodies of accountants in that. I mean, of just accountants, just looking into accountancy, and then you've got a law body that regulates lawyers and so forth. Do you think we must have something like this, but it is independent and reporting to the president directly?
Something close to that. Something close to that, but not just be a regulatory body. I think we have to have the regulatory body and the body on the ground ensuring that we're doing this. Because we need to change the way we think and become industrialists. We need to build the systems required. There is no way we're going to boost the GDP of our country. There's no way we're going to build employment. There is no way we are going to maximize the potential of this economy and lead this economy to success if ever we do not have industrialists. We need industrialists and not people who are just extracting from the economy. We need people who think in systems and not think only in terms of political ideologies. People can understand, okay, no, economically, we need to move into this specific direction. These are specific decisions we need to make and be able to make them without any politicization. That is what we need. So I do not have in mind clearly how can the government be able to implement that at full scale. But I think a government that has done that properly, it has to be your US through Department of Government Efficiencies, which was led or still led by Elon Musk now, where they ensure but they minimize the inefficiencies of that specific country.
Let's park it here and just get ready for the news. And then when we come back, we wrap it up. No? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. Exactly 10 o'clock, which means it's time for the news. When we come back, we wrap up the segment on the president's letter. Gwenga Sihle Peter is here. I am here. And now we're going to the news. When we come back, oh my goodness, we wrap it up with a bang as always. Good morning. Let's discuss the letter from the president. 34 minutes past the hour of 10. In the first hour, we read the letter from the president, spoke a bit to it, looking at what it means, and looking at some of the loopholes within the letter, raising a couple of pertinent issues in that letter. And I think before we went to the news and went to the song, the one thing I wanted to ask was, this letter speaks of a partnership between four important stakeholders. You've got the government on one hand, you've got civil society on the other, you've got labor on the other, and then you've got business. Who do you trust the most and who do you trust the least in these four different stakeholders? A partnership for this transition, right? There should be a partnership between government, business, labor, civil society. It sounds nice as a tagline. Whenever someone says, let's collaborate, I'm like, yes, collaborate. But business, labor, government, and civil society, who do you trust the most and who do you trust the least? Why? Like partnership, green economy.
That's a tough one. I would say, let's go with civil societies.
Okay, you trust civil society.
I'd rather go with civil societies.
Why?
Because labor is under government.
No, but fair. Okay, but the labor, I think labor being the people. Because government is labor being the workers now.
Okay, I'll go societies, labor, government, then businesses.
Oh, why don't you trust business?
Because in the business market, it's all about incentive. That's all it is. So if I'm not going to get a financial benefit, if there's nothing I'm going to gain from this, then business is not interested. That's how it survives. So I'd rather put my bet on the state over a business.
And then government. Government was third in your list,
Government third.
but I thought we should trust them the most. This is their initiative. They've come out. They've come up with this idea. They are proposing this partnership. They are at the forefront of, basically they are the signatory to whatever transition should take place. So that's them. They are the main stakeholder. Everyone else revolves around them. They are the bridge connecting all of these three. So why do you trust the government third least hour?
Because as much as it's their idea, they are the ones who can enforce it. However, the only people who can force them to enforce it, it's the labor and the societies. So if ever those are tight, I believe the government can then be able to ensure that they fulfill their responsibility. That's why I would go for societies over a bit of labor, because even labor alone without structure of societies, then it's null and void. So I think societies and labor together, they can then force the government to account and be able to ensure that they can work properly. Because our government is a corrupt government, our government is an inefficient government, our government is an ineffective government. We need them to be
Is that fair though to put that on the government? Because I think when you look at what the government has been able to achieve and perhaps what it should achieve, there is a gap, but there's so much that they do right. Is it fair to paint them by that brush to say the government is corrupt? Because I also think that how we word things and the language that we use is language that I hate to sound like a Christian right now, but if we've got a stigma and a narrative around the government being a corrupt government and being an inefficient government, then we really are kind of setting that as the standard. We really are missing the bigger picture. We're not acknowledging, that two things can be true at once.
Two things can be true at once. However, they cannot survive at the same time. As much as we can have the good things, it's not that the government is not doing good things. There are a lot of good things they're doing. Since 2020, we have been getting grants, and those have never ended. IMF, our debt servicing costs are lowering a bit. We look into the economy. The valuation of the rand is growing a bit. So there's a lot that is going on that is good. However, it is hard for that good to prosper. It is hard for that good to be good when the system is fragile, when the system is corrupt. So until we fix the system, irregardless of what they do, their actions sometimes cannot be seen, or they cannot fulfill their purpose simply because of the system itself being fragile. So as much as, yes, you are right when you say about there are good things that they do. I agree with that. But it's hard for us to see those good things because as much as there are these good actions, there are few, there are good people in governance who are actually doing their level best. But because other departments and other government officials who are corrupt, who are not doing their job properly, because they fail, it gets to then kill that other department that is doing good. So it gets to be an infection, a disease that is continuously infecting the other departments that are doing good. So I think it's a problem, it's a crisis, in fact, that we need to resolve in this country for us to be able to then say, Bana, the system that we have with all our government departments, they are all functioning properly, growing at the same rate and doing their job as they are required.
And final words, just before we let you go, maybe for a listener who feels like everything that is happening to them rather than for them, what would you say to those who still feel left behind, who feel like they're not included, even in this letter that speaks about inclusion? They're not truly included. They've never were. And even though government does these great things, they still feel left behind because they don't reach their communities.
Let's give government time, guys. Like I said last time, there's only much the government can do because they have limited resources. Same as us, there's much we can do. We have limited time, we have limited energy, we have limited attention. So we cannot do multiple things at once. We have to, for us to be able to do anything effectively, efficiently, we have to put our focus on that specific one thing. So we should have the same idea with government, but maybe government is actually focusing on this specific thing for the economy. So it's not that they're neglecting you, it's just that you're not feeling it currently, what they are doing. But trust me, over the years, if we look into Zulendo Thabo Mbeki's time and the growth we have had up to Ramaphosa's time, there has been growth, a lot of growth. There has been improvement, there has been betterments of systems, enhancements of the systems. Maybe not the way we desire as the people, but it is there. It is there. It's not something we can dispute. So give them time, you know. And like I said, we all have a responsibility as people to also ensure that we do the specific things that are required from us. So we have we have a collective responsibility to also ensure that we do what we can do in our power, and then we let the government do what they can do in their power. Then it's only when they really, really fail, and we have seen by they failed dismally, then that's when we can then go for them. But for now, let's give them time. Let's see what they can try. They are trying. There is improvement. Let's take the small wins and try build momentum to bigger wins.
I like that. You know, the whole time you're looking here, I'm like, where is this young man looking at? I forgot. New studios, I'm like, I even forgot. But before we let you go, once more, I promise. Think of 2 books. I'll give you 2 books or 2 resources that young people can lean into when they want to, you know, get familiar with the economy, with systems thinking, and, you know, how they can be informed. Just 2 recommendations that you think are the first go-to for a young person like Eve. I was like, Eish, I want to have these conversations. I just don't know where to start.
Nice thing is that you have Claude and you have Notebook LM. Be smart.
Claude is so great.
Claude is great.
Yo.
Claude is the best. Claude is like the king of AIs. The king of AIs.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. Get Claude. Ask Claude to generate notes for you for a specific topic you want to learn. Let's say you want to learn about economics, you want to learn about law, you want to learn about business. You ask Claude to give you about 100 topics you need to understand under the business sector for you to be 100% in. It's going to give you that. Then you start with one topic. You ask it to generate as many notes to be as concise. Make sure Claude wako you set it to max or at least to extra so that you can get the best out of it, and you choose the highest, the best AI there. Then you take those notes, you take them to your notebook.
Do you pay for yours?
No, I don't pay for my Claude.
Okay.
I generate one note for the whole day, and they help me learn. I learn new things every single day. You take those things, if you want to learn and understand better, you put them on Notebook LM. Then Notebook LM can make you an audio recording. It can make you a video explainer to you. It can give you slides. It can give you infographics. It can give you quizzes and many more other resources. So try Claude and try Notebook LM. That's where you can start. Then once you've built the momentum, then you can start looking into books.
Absolutely. Exactly 44 minutes past the hour of 10. Thank you, Kwenga Sihlebita, a systems thinker and an author helping us unpack the letter from the president. A really great time we had here on the show. So long, let's give you great music.
The Voice Lounge, where voices come to life.